Whenever I identify a pain point in my home, I very quickly ask myself, can my smart home solve this? And quite often it can, with the addition of a motion sensor, a contact sensor, or even millimeter wave zone detection. But not always. And every time you solve a problem with another sensor, you have to weigh up the cost of buying it, installing it, changing batteries, and maintaining yet another device. But what if, instead of adding another dedicated sensor, you could simply teach a camera to become one? Not because the camera is doing anything particularly clever, but because of what software can now do with the image that it captures. Today I'm going to show you how I have trained Frigate to recognize whether my recycling bag has actually been put outside, whether my kids have tidied their bedroom, and how it exposes all of that back to Home Assistant as sensors that I can automate around. And in order to do that, I've been testing this new panoramic camera from Annke, which ended up being the perfect partner for this project. So let's get it set up and installed and see what this combination can do. Hi, I'm James, and I've been building out my smart home for years, with products from just about every manufacturer out there, figuring out what works and what doesn't. Before we jump into Frigate though, let's have a quick look at the camera. Because whilst everything you're going to see later is powered by Frigate, having the right camera can make a huge difference to how useful these AI models become. So this is the Annke FCD800, and at first glance it looks like a fairly typical security camera, but inside it actually has two separate image sensors, and then the camera itself stitches those two images together to create one seamless 180-degree panoramic view, allowing a single camera to cover an area that would normally require at least two. And that's exactly why it suited my project so well. I've gone ahead and mounted it above my porch, where it can now see the entire front area of my home, including the exact spot where we leave our recycling bags ready for collection. Now this doesn't sound particularly exciting yet, but later you'll see why that extra visibility becomes incredibly useful. Inside the box you get the camera itself, some mounting hardware, a waterproof Ethernet gland, a drilling template, and the usual documentation. Now this is a PoE camera, which is always my preferred option for permanent installations, because one Ethernet cable provides both your power and your networking, making installation nice and tidy, whilst also giving you a far more reliable connection than you would get from Wi-Fi. If you don't already have PoE, you can always use a PoE injector or a PoE switch. But if you're installing lots of cameras around your home, I would definitely recommend going the switch route. Getting it connected was refreshingly straightforward. It did ask me to create an account, but it wasn't compulsory, which is always nice to see. After I plugged it into my network, I was able to add it into Scripted using OnVIF, which I used to expose all my cameras to Apple Home and then rebroadcast them to Frigate. And then I could point Frigate at the rebroadcasted camera stream, and within a few minutes it was recording it and ready to use. Well, after I figured out that the rebroadcast wouldn't work because I'd used a special character in the password. Now, if you've never heard of Frigate before, don't worry, we'll come on to exactly what that is in just a moment. But the image quality on this camera definitely impressed me, because those two separate sensors are stitched together. So you end up with an incredibly wide image, whilst still retaining enough detail to zoom in on different parts of the scene. The stitching itself is surprisingly good too. Unless you're actively looking for it in motion, it's very easy to forget that you are actually looking at footage from two separate cameras. At night time you've got the choice between traditional infrared night vision or full color night vision using the built-in white LEDs, which do a pretty good job of illuminating closer targets. There's also two-way audio with a built-in microphone and speaker, onboard AI detection if you're using compatible software, local recording to a micro SD card if you want, and, as I mentioned before, OnVIF support for connecting to a third-party NVR software like Frigate. But for me, none of those are the standout feature. It's all about that huge field of view. Because for this project, the camera isn't watching where my recycling bags are stored day to day, it's watching what happens after they leave the house. And that is the missing piece that my smart home didn't have before. So, what exactly is Frigate doing with all of this? Well, I was already running Frigate and I recently updated it and stumbled across a feature that I genuinely think could change the way that a lot of us build automations. Now, if none of what I just said made any sense to you, don't worry. An NVR is a network video recorder, aka a central recording system for all of your network video cameras. And Frigate is open source software which you can install on your computer to turn it into an NVR. And that's become incredibly popular with Home Assistant users thanks to its local AI object detection. Rather than simply recording whenever something moves, Frigate can recognize things like people, cars, dogs, cats, and much more, deciding what's actually worth recording. And it does it all without any data having to leave your local network. Better still, it exposes all of those detections into Home Assistant. So instead of creating an automation that says, if motion is detected, you can instead say, if a person is detected. And already that's a huge step forward from a lot of cameras. But recently, Frigate introduced something even more interesting: the ability to train your own AI models. Now, there are currently two different types of model that you can train. One of them allows you to identify specific objects or people across different cameras, which I've not been able to experiment with just yet. But it's the other option that's really caught my attention: state models. Instead of recognizing what something is, they recognize the state of a specific area of a particular camera. And since Home Assistant then sees that state, you can automate around it. That might not sound particularly exciting just yet, but let me show you the first place that I used it, because this is where it suddenly clicked for me just how powerful this feature could become. So quickly, before I show you my first example, it's probably worth quickly explaining how I'm running Frigate. In my case, I'm running it as a Docker container on my desktop Mac here. Since this machine is already on 24 hours a day, and it's got plenty of processing power, and that leaves my Home Assistant server free to get on with everything else. You definitely don't need to do it this way though. If your Home Assistant server is powerful enough, Frigate is also available as an app, formerly known as an add-on, which is by far the easiest way to get started. It takes care of a lot of the setup for you, and connecting the Frigate integration into Home Assistant is then very straightforward. Now that's quite important because it's the Frigate integration that actually exposes all of the detections from the Frigate system, and therefore the custom state models back into Home Assistant as entities that you can automate with. The only thing I'd be mindful of if you're doing it this way is where your recordings end up being stored. If you're running Frigate directly inside Home Assistant and you're including your media folder in your backups, those recordings can make your backups grow pretty quickly. For that reason, I personally prefer keeping Frigate separate, but both approaches work perfectly well. So, let's talk about recycling. Now, I know that's not the most exciting sentence I've ever said on this channel, but stick with me. A little while ago, I showed how I automated remembering to put the recycling out. The bags live in this little cupboard, and whenever they were removed, an infrared beam sensor across the cupboard detected that they were gone. Simple, reliable, and it worked far better than the old system of, well, remembering. Every recycling day, if the bags were still detected in the cupboard, Home Assistant would remind me to put them outside, and even set an alarm to wake me up in the morning if I wasn't already. Then later in the day, it would remind me to bring them back in if they weren't detected back in the cupboard yet. Job done. Well, not quite. Because my automations had one fatal flaw: people. See, normally I'm the first one awake in our house, so most weeks I'm the one who puts the recycling out in the morning. And to help me remember, my helpful wife often takes the bags out of the cupboard the night before and leaves them just inside the front door. Perfectly sensible, except for one tiny problem. My automations would have absolutely no idea that she'd done that. As far as Home Assistant is concerned, the bags had left the cupboard, which means that they must have been outside and my alarm can be disabled. Except they weren't. They were still sitting inside the house, waiting for me the following morning when I eventually woke up. The beam sensor wasn't wrong. It did exactly what I asked it to do. It detected whether the bags had left the cupboard. The trouble was, that wasn't the actual information that I cared about. What I really wanted to know was, have the recycling bags actually been put outside? And that's a completely different question, which is where Frigate's new state models come in. Rather than replacing my existing beam sensor, I've simply added another source of information. The beam sensor still tells Home Assistant when the bags leave the cupboard. But now the Annke camera mounted above my porch gives Home Assistant a completely different view. It can see the area outside my front door where we leave the recycling bags before collection, and using Frigate's state model, I trained it to recognise 3 different situations. No recycling bags at all, recycling bags outside and still full, and recycling bags outside after they'd been emptied. And training it is surprisingly straightforward overall. You simply capture lots of examples of each state, label them, and then let Frigate build the model. Once it's finished training, that state then appears as a brand new entity inside Home Assistant, or at least once you reload the integration. And then as far as Home Assistant is concerned, it's just another sensor. Except instead of buying one, you've effectively built a virtual one yourself. And now my automations have better context. If the beam sensor says that the bags have left the cupboard, but Frigate can't see them outside, Home Assistant knows they probably haven't actually been taken outside yet. They are most likely still somewhere inside the house. But once Frigate detects them outside, now Home Assistant knows they've genuinely been put out for collection. And then later in the day, if Frigate still sees the bags outside, but now it recognises them as empty, it knows the bin lorry has already been. So instead of reminding me to put the recycling out, it reminds me to bring the bags back in. And a huge win there is that I get notified as soon as they're taken. So once they're empty, they don't get blown down the street. And that's something I simply couldn't achieve with just the beam sensor alone. What I love about this isn't necessarily that Frigate replaced a sensor. In this case, it didn't. But it did make the whole thing much smarter. The beam sensor still does exactly what it has always done. Frigate simply backs that up by adding missing context. And that's something that I'm starting to realise more and more with Home Assistant automations. The best ones don't usually come from replacing one sensor with another. They come from combining lots of different pieces of information until your home can finally truly understand what is actually happening. So naturally, once I'd built one of these state models, I immediately started wondering what else I could teach it. And this is where my kid's bedroom comes in. You see, the recycling isn't actually the automation that I'm most excited about. This one is. Like most parents, getting the kids to come downstairs can be a process. Over the years, I've tried all sorts of different ways to automate it. And at the moment, when it's time for them to come downstairs, Home Assistant sends an announcement to the HomePod in their bedroom telling them to come down. And at the same time, it populates a dashboard on the tablet that's in their room with a checklist of everything that they need to do before they come down. Things like making their beds, bringing their juice bottles, and of course, generally tidying their room. Now, in theory, they tick each of these items off, then come downstairs. But in reality, well, they're kids. The checklist gets ignored, and they come downstairs anyway. And then we have to send them straight back upstairs because their room still looks like a tornado has been through it. So I started wondering, could Frigate tell whether their room was tidy enough? Now, don't worry, no, I'm not asking AI to judge interior design. It's simply being taught to recognise 2 broad states, tidy and not tidy, because that's all my automations really need to know. So now, when we call them downstairs, something new happens. Home Assistant still creates the checklist for their tablet, but now it also starts a countdown timer on their Yoto player, and their bedroom lights will flash blue to let them know that tidy up time has started. And then Frigate takes over. Every few seconds, it's looking at the room as a whole and deciding which state it's currently in. And as soon as it decides that the room is tidy enough, it changes the state of the sensor in Home Assistant, which then flashes the bedroom lights green, stops the timer, and now they know that they are allowed to come downstairs. No button presses, no pretending that they're finished and arguments over whether they've done it well enough. Their room effectively marks its own homework. And I absolutely love that. And as a bonus, the whole process has been gamified, so they actually want to trigger those green lights. Now, it's worth reiterating the camera isn't actually making any of these decisions. Frigate is simply exposing another sensor into Home Assistant, and then Home Assistant is doing what it does best and reacting to information. The only difference is that information didn't physically exist before. And now, ever since building these 2 automations, I found myself looking around the house completely differently. Instead of asking, what sensor do I need? I'm asking, could Frigate recognise this? Could it recognize whether the washing basket is full? Whether somebody has left a bike outside? Whether a parcel has been moved after it was delivered? Whether the garage door is blocked by something? The list just keeps on growing. And because those detections become normal Home Assistant entities, you can use them exactly like any other sensor in automations. I've even started using them in shortcuts. You can use the render template action in the Home Assistant app to check a sensor and have it read out whether or not the parking space is taken out front. I genuinely think this is one of those features that's going to become more and more useful as people start experimenting with it. However, as amazing as it is, it's not perfect. It has some limitations. And the first is hardware. All of this AI processing has to happen somewhere. If you're only analyzing one or two little bits of one or two cameras, you don't need anything too crazy. But as you add more cameras and train more models and increase the number of detections that Frigate is performing, you'll naturally end up needing more processing power. And that's one of the main reasons that I'm running it on my desktop Mac here. It's permanently on anyway, and it has more than enough performance for this sort of workload. The second limitation is patience. These models don't magically understand your environment. You have to teach them. And that means collecting lots of examples of every state that you're trying to detect. Different times of day, different lighting conditions, different weather, different seasons even. And depending on the states you're trying to recognize, that could take a while. My recycling states only change once a week, so building up good enough training images wasn't something that I could do in an afternoon. And especially since you have no control over when a training image is captured, Frigate captures them as and when it sees fit and keeps the latest few. So that means you also have to be quick to go and categorize useful images while they're still in that limited cache. But the more examples you give it, the better the results become. And finally, once you've trained one of those models, try not to move your camera, because that model that you've trained has learned that specific scene. If you completely change the angle, move the mounting position, or significantly alter what the camera can see, you'll probably find yourself having to retrain that model again. So it's definitely worth making sure that you've decided on the exact camera position before you invest loads of time collecting and training that data. Despite those limitations though, I genuinely think that this is one of the biggest additions to Frigate, or my smart home in general, for a long time. Not because it replaces traditional sensors, I think in many cases it's not really quick enough for that, but because it fills the gaps that they leave behind. My beam sensor still has a job, my motion sensors and contact sensors, they all still have a job. They all fulfill a need and they do so quickly. Frigate simply gives Home Assistant another source of information. And as we all know, the more context your automations have, the smarter they become. And the Annke FCD800 ended up being the perfect camera to pair with this project. That huge 180-degree panoramic view meant I could monitor the entire area out the front of my house with a single camera, giving Frigate exactly the visibility it needed for my recycling automation. And as I mentioned, even for detecting whether or not there's a car in our space. The image quality has been excellent, the setup was pretty straightforward, and it integrated into Frigate without any issues. If you're already running Frigate, or you're thinking of getting started, I think that this is definitely worth taking a look at. The link to the camera will be down in the description below as always, and on my website. And if you purchase one using my affiliate link, I will earn a small commission at no cost to you, so thanks for supporting the channel. But before we finish up, I would like to say a huge thank you to all of my mid-tier channel members whose names are on screen now. Not only are they helping to support the channel, but every month they are automatically entered into my members only giveaway, where I send one lucky member a smart home product from my ever-growing bucket of tech. So if you would like to support what I do and have a chance of winning yourself, there's a link to join somewhere below or at the top of my website. I am really curious to hear what you would train Frigate to recognize around your home, so do let me know down in the comments, because I have a feeling that I've only just scratched the surface of what's possible with this feature. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and consider subscribing, and as always remember, home is where the smart is.